Hey everybody, welcome to Never Stop Building. My name is Jason, and today I want to do a little video for the DIYers out there. I had some good conversations with some friends, and I thought it would be cool to make a video called the top 3 power tools to take your woodworking to the next level. I'm not trying to do anything but provide information here. So I got 3 power tools that I believe are a good next step if you want to take that home woodworking to the next sort of echelon. I'm going to assume you already have your chop saw, your circular saw, your impact driver, kind of your basic homeowner tools. And these are the next 3 I think you should probably get. I'll put links in the description if you're interested in any of these tools, but you should be able to find most of these at most normal tool stores in the United States. So the theme of these 3 tools, why I think these are probably the right choice if you're a home DIY woodworker, or even if you're a professional. I think if you're moving up into the professional world, these also make sense. 3 points here. 1, this is solo operation. All these tools don't require someone to help, either holding a large piece of wood, like on a table saw, or outfeed, like on a planer or something like that. All this stuff you can do just by yourself. The other key aspect of all these tools is that you can take them to the work, right? You might not have a full shop, or you might not have a garage that's completely open, you know, you got cars in it and stuff like that. You want to take your tools to the work. You don't want to have to make a huge space just to make a cut, like on a table saw. So you can bring all these tools to your materials, which also helps with the solo aspect of it. If you have a large piece of plywood, you want to break it down by bringing the tool to the plywood, like you would with a circular saw. And also these 3 tools are versatile. So you can do a lot of different things with them. My kind of mentality has always been, you do a new project, you get a new tool. That way you're spacing it out. You're not buying a whole bunch of stuff that you got to learn all at once. It's not overwhelming. Basically, if you're going to do the next project, try to get one tool that you can start to get comfortable with in that project, gain some experience, and break it up like that. But when you're starting out, you want to have each of those tools have the most bang for the buck, right? So you want to get a tool that can do a lot of different things so that it's not sitting on the shelf most of the time. So all 3 of these tools have that going for them. Let's talk about the first tool. So the first tool on my list of top 3 tools for the beginner DIY woodworker are track saw. So the track saw, and most of them come with a track. Now, if you fell out of your chair because I pulled a Festool up here, keep in mind, I do this professionally, but there are a lot of companies that make these now. Festool makes a great one. The Makita one, I've looked at it in the store. It is basically a 100% copy, maybe a few little details of the Festool one. I think some other brands, lesser brands, make them, and I do know that I guess there's like a Craig jig. There's a couple different companies that makes tracks and some sort of thing that you can attach your circular saw onto. Before we get into the tool itself, I'm going to say that you got to be careful with those jigs. It's one of those things where 90% of the way there or 80% of the way there is 0% of the way there. Because the key aspect of the track saw is its precision straight cuts. It rides on this track. It follows the line perfectly. It stays very stable. Also, what these track saws do is you can set them flat down, and when you unlock it, you plunge into the work. If you have a circular saw, it doesn't have the spring-loaded plunge mechanism. So I would be careful about the jigs, but you know, your mileage may vary. So this sits in the track. It rides along the track. It has adjustment screws so that it has no play left and right. And on this track, it has this, this cutaway lip, or cut away a piece of material, right? So the first time you use the track, it basically cuts away this material, and that allows you to be very precise with future cuts. So you line up the edge of this piece of plastic with your lines, and then you will cut perfectly along the line. Okay, so why do I think you should get a track saw as your next tool? One thing is you can break down sheet goods all day long, precisely and safely. I don't even like, I mean, I hate plywood, and I definitely hate trying to break down plywood on a table saw. You know, in the US, it's a 4x8 sheet. That's enormous. It's usually pretty heavy if it's 3/4 inch plywood. It bends. It starts to bend on the table saw. It can pinch the blade. I hate doing it. I use this all the time. I break down large panels with it. You set up your lines, use a right angle, use the 3-4-5 method to get a line on your plywood, set up your track, zip. You know, put a couple pieces of wood under your sawhorses. You can break down all your pieces of plywood with the track saw. Super safe. You don't have to worry about kickback.
Actually, that's not entirely accurate. You can get some kickback on the track saw if you plunge and you don't control the base of the saw. If you plunge into some wood and you hesitate, or the saw base is not held firmly, it can pop backwards. So I would avoid plunging into material unless you absolutely need to. But otherwise, if you start the saw outside the material, it's a lot safer than a table saw.
There's a whole bunch of accessories that you can get for the tracks. There's a right angle accessory. There's spacers, so you can make strips, like you might rip a bunch of strips on a table saw. You can set this track up so that you can rip a strip off of a board, move it over, rip another strip. So it can pretty much do all the work of a table saw. And table saws are dangerous. I've used table saws since I was in high school or before. They still give me the heebie-jeebies. I had a friend that had an injury from a table saw. In this big shop, I don't really use a table saw. I have a sliding table saw that I mostly use for right angles and panels. But as far as using the magical table saw as the centerpiece of a woodworking shop, I don't believe it. I think it should be relegated to a special use case. And the special bonus feature of the track saw is it is the beginning of material breakdown from rough stock. It is the first level in jointing stock, right? Because you imagine, I'll set this up here. If you have boards up to maybe about 2 inches thick, 50 millimeters, 1/4, a key part of woodworking is getting a straight right angle edge on a board. And if you have a rough piece of stock, like this rough piece of stock here, by setting up this track and then running the track saw along the material, you can create that first straight edge. Even if your stock is kind of wavy, you can shim the track, you can get the track adjusted, you can attach your track to another board to make it more rigid and flat, and that can help you start to joint material. I think my buddy that inspired this video recently did a mantle for his fireplace area. You can get the track on a rough sawn piece of wood, shim it, and then cut that perfectly straight edge to go against the wall. Also, these tracks are extendable. They have pieces of metal that slip in here, and you can make a track as long as you want. I know I have one that's 3 meters long. So if I have something super long, I can attach this track to that track, cut a very straight line. So no trouble breaking down 4x8 sheets of plywood. And when you're doing that, basically, you only really need the space of the sheet of plywood, whereas a table saw with a sheet of plywood, you need 8 feet in front and 8 feet behind, so 16 feet plus a little extra to rip down that full length of plywood. All right, so that's the first tool, track saw. Get yourself a track saw. You will never regret it. You can use it from the beginning of your journey in woodworking all the way up into the stratosphere. I use this one in most every project. Okay, the second power tool that you gotta get when you're moving up in the woodworking world is, what's this? Palm router, little handheld router. So they're small, they get into some tight places, they don't have a ton of power, they're not gonna get you in trouble, like these big honking routers. They can do most of the same kind of stuff, and usually you can get them in battery-powered versions compatible with whatever brand of tools that you've allied yourself with. So I obviously got all Makita stuff here. This little palm router, super handy, throw a Makita battery in there, it lasts for a good long time. Why do I think you should get a palm router as your tool? Well, because it is super versatile for joinery and grooves. The one thing that the track saw can't really do as well as a table saw is cut grooves or dados. If you're doing plywood construction or frame and panel construction, often you have panels set into grooves. And you can make those with a track saw by taking lots of little cuts, or 2 cuts if you have a 1/4-inch panel, or 6mm panel. You can make 2 cuts with a thick blade, or 3 cuts, and you can make a groove that way. But in many cases, that's time consuming and the setup is tricky. But with a palm router and either using the other side of your track saw or a piece of plywood as a guide, other side of your track saw track or a plywood as a guide, you can run pretty straight grooves with the router. I have attached just a Lexan base so I have more support and I can see what I'm doing here. That's a really easy mod to do. You just trace the holes and drill some holes in there. As far as bits go, I like white side bits. They're very good quality, sharp. Here's one. I haven't even used this one yet. It's a undercut grooving bit. So it has a bearing, and this one cuts 1/2 inch deep. So you set your depth with the router, and it can cut a 1/2 inch by 1/4 inch groove along material. You can also use a bit like this, which is a pattern bit. It has a bearing at the top. So if you have a piece of guide wood or a curved pattern, this will ride along that template and cut a groove. This one, I believe, is a 5/8 inch groove. This bit I often keep in the palm router all the time. It's a bottom bearing chamfer bit. So what this will do is the bearing will ride along your finished stock or whatever, and depending on the depth you set this bit out of the router, it'll put a decorative chamfer, a little 45-degree angle all the way around. You can do the same thing with a 1/4 round, so you can do a round over on all your woodwork. There's a 1/4 inch dovetail bit, so you can do sliding dovetails. With some jigs and some fancy setup, you can start to cut right angle joinery dovetails, but that's a whole separate thing. And then I don't have a lot of 1/4 inch bits because I have a big 1/2 inch router for most of this stuff, but you can get all sorts of different bits for decorative molding and OGs and curves and fancy stuff like that. So it's a very versatile tool because not only can you use it for grooves and joinery, but you can use it for decorative finishing and edge work. Often this router either has that chamfer bit I was talking about on or the fluted 1/4 inch bit, and I will use it for hogging out pockets for mortises or large recesses in material. If you're putting drawer or door hardware in a cabinet, you could trace your line and hog out the bulk of the material with a palm router. It's a very handy tool to have. Recently I finished a kitchen island project. I had a huge table. This table was completely filled with all sorts of hand tools and chisels and planes and measuring stuff. And this was basically the main power tool that was sitting on that table along with everything else. Because I could run a chamfer really quickly, I could hog out a little bit of the mortise and all that type of stuff. You will use this all the time, and I use this way more than I use my huge honking 3 horsepower router. So that is the second tool in the top 3 power tools. So let's talk about the third one. And now the third one, I'd say last but not least, but it's probably least. This is probably the least important one of the 3, but you know, you have to do things in threes. And I do think that this is a very valuable tool to have. And you guessed it if you saw it, power hand planer. Let me throw a battery in this. So the power hand planer is exactly what it sounds like. It's a hand plane that is powered. There's a cutter here. It's about 3.5 inches wide with 2 blades. It spins around like this. And it does the same operation that a jointer or a lunchbox planer or the large planers would do, which is take a cut off of the material, kind of making it flat, I suppose you could say. So why is this included in the top 3 tools? Well, first, you can take it to the work. Along with the track saw, you're starting down that road to dimensioning stock. The more you do woodworking, the more you're going to get tired of paying expensive box store, Home Depot prices for pre-thicknessed wood, like 3/4 inch or 1 1/4 inch hardwoods that are already planed down. First of all, they're all kiln dried with steam rapidly. The color's bad. You know, they don't care about the grain direction. There's knots in it. It's garbage. It's not the wood you want to deal with. You want to go to the lumber yard and you want to fall in love with a piece of wood and it's going to be all rough sawn from the mill and, you know, or sitting in someone's barn for 40 years. And you want to take it down and make your own boards, right? Before you get to joiner, planer, that whole expensive route, get yourself a track saw, get yourself a hand power planer, and you can get most of the way there. So imagine a board, here, let's look at this board. Imagine this board was in, you know, much rougher shape than it is. If it has some waves here, I'd check it with a ruler, identify the high spots, and then setting this at a nice light cut, I'd work on the high spots, take some material off, check it with a ruler, keep working it down, just like you would with a hand plane of old. And then once it's all flat, you can also go cross grain, very light cut, and then you do your finish cuts, and now you have a almost flat board. You know, the flatness is totally determined by your skill. You can continue to refine it and check it with a ruler until you can get this board very flat. Then you take your track saw, you set it on this flat board, you make that 90-degree edge. And there you have the beginnings of a flat board. If you wanted to thickness it, it would take a little longer, but if I wanted to make this, let's say 2 inches, now that I have one flat surface, I mark 2 inches all the way around, and I could use the same thing. It would take a long time, but take it down to my line all the way around, flatten it out, and I have a pretty flat board. Now, I'm not saying you got to do this on all your boards, but you will find many uses for this around the home. If you have a door that's sticking, you pop that door off, one stroke with a power planer, door's not sticking anymore. If you have a twisted fence post or something like that, you can mark the high spot, plane it down quickly. This has a groove in it that allows you to hold it at an angle to cut really quick chamfers on things. If you have splintery edges on a post or something like that, you can knock it down really quickly. It's definitely not going to be the most used of the 3 tools I mentioned today, but it is going to be very handy when you need it. And let's say you're doing that rough sawn mantle project. Well, you could sit there with a sander for 100 hours and get some sort of lung disease, or you could mark the high spots, plane it down, hit it with a sander, and you're done. Let's take a look real quick at this big dining table I'm about to do. So this huge Douglas fir dining table I'm about to work on is all sorts of warped from drying. It's too big to fit through even this huge planer I have. So how am I going to flatten it out and surface it? Well, I'm going to use that power planer just like anybody. We'll mark the high spots, and we'll take lots of planing strokes. I actually have a larger power planer, a 6-inch wide one. But between those 2 power planers, we'll get this hole completely flat. So if you want to build yourself a dining table or something like that, go at it. Most of these are offered by all the major tool manufacturers, and they take the batteries like every other tool you got. You usually get this tool for not that much money because it doesn't have the battery. You know, you just get it as an accessory. This is probably also one of the more dangerous tools because it's got this crazy spinning blade on the bottom. and requires a little bit of trickiness to get it set up, but don't be intimidated by it. Definitely handy to have in your arsenal. So I think that's it for today. 3 power tools you should get next. Don't even question it. Just listen to me. I know what I'm doing, right? Track saw, palm trim router, couple bits, and if you want to splurge, power planer. And you can get a lot done. And you don't even have to set up a shop to do it. So I hope you found this information valuable. The tools that I have, I'll try to put some links in the description below. Please, if you're liking this content, check out Patreon, or not, I don't care. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.